Good day, ladies and gentlemen. First, I wish to express my thanks to the Cultural Knowledge Consortium for inviting me to present this lecture today. And second, I wish to thank you, the audience, for your interest in attending this lecture. And I look forward to answering your questions at the end. My talk will be Afghanistan, as the first slide says, Afghanistan, a pivot of world civilization. I have been fascinated with this country and the region of Central Asia for many years, both academically and professionally. My talk will be on what has not been covered by the news. For over 10 years, the natural focus has been on 9/11, the war on terrorism, Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, Mullah Omar, the Taliban, insurgency, and troop deployments. But the history of Afghanistan, the land and its peoples, in particular the Pashtuns, is more than the international events of the last 10 years. It is more than the endless wars of the last 35 years, which have engulfed the country since the communist coup of 1978. Afghanistan has had a profound impact on world civilizations, disproportionate to its territorial or population size. My talk will be on the significance of Afghanistan on the development and spread of three civilizations: Hellenistic, Buddhist, and Islamic. This influence still resonates with the latter two. So on the left of the first screen, the bottom symbol is the Star of Macedonia, or the Star of Alexander the Great, to represent Hellenism. The second is Buddhism. It's the Dharma chakra, the wheel of life. And top is arabesque art form depicting the Shahada, the profession of faith in Islam. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. Afghanistan is a relatively new country. It was established in 1747. It's just 36 years older than the United States. Its birth was a result of the unintended consequences of the 18th century revolution in commerce through sea power. For millennia, trade between Europe and Asia had been conducted by land routes collectively known as Silk Road. These stretched from China to the Mediterranean. They converged in Afghanistan, where a trunk line went south into India. So the next slide, we have one overall depiction of that Silk line, a Silk Road with the various trunk lines. If I go to the next, we have, if you can see, the green outline imposed on the modern state and the borders of modern Afghanistan. Gives you more of the impact of how this was a hub between east and west and the trunk lines going to the south. Historically, various empires would control parts of this Silk Road, and this would provide them with revenues for their coffers. These revenues were collected as taxes on traveling merchants and on the towns which sprung up along the Silk Road that provided travelers with food, clothing, drink, shelter, supplies, services. Now, some of the famous names, if we go from west to east, we have Byzantium, present-day Istanbul. Going into Syria, we have Aleppo, Antioch, Damascus. Going into present-day Iraq, you would have Babylon, Ctesiphon. Later in the Middle Ages, you have Baghdad as an equally important site. Going into Iran, you have the cities of Kermanshah, Ra, Nishapur. North into present-day Turkmenistan, you have Marv. Then in Uzbekistan, you have Bukhara, Samarkand. Afghanistan, you have Herat and Kabul. Neighboring Pakistan, you have Peshawar. And into western China, the province of Xinjiang, also called by some East Turkestan, you have the cities of Kashgar and Urumqi. Then going into central China, Lijiang, and then they proceed further to the coast. By the 1700s, much of the Silk Road ran through three empires: China, India, and Persia. But the advent of modern sailing ships allowed for trade via the sea lanes to be exchanged in greater volume, more frequently, in less time and for less cost. So soon these sailing ships had a monopoly on trade between Europe and Asia. As the economic importance of the Silk Road declined, revenues declined, undermining the strength and stability, particularly of India and Persia. Those empires now had less money to support a large army to defend the integrity of the imperial borders, or to buy the loyalty of tribal leaders in the various frontier zones, which would be especially the Afghan region. These two factors, the lack of money for an army and to buy loyalty from the tribal leaders, added to the assassination of the Persian king, Nader Shah, led to the demise of his empire, briefly, but long enough that the Pashtuns would emerge on the scene of history. They would break out and carve for themselves from the eastern part of Nader Shah's empire, Persia, and from the northwestern part of the Indian Empire, the Mughal Empire, their country, Afghanistan. It was also called originally the Durrani Empire because of the tribal confederation that successfully led the revolt that resulted in the creation of Afghanistan. So large an extent was this country that some historians speculated it could have actually become a rival to the Ottoman Empire as a legitimate political authority for Sunnis, a rival to the Ottomans' claim to be the Caliphate. As you can see, it was quite extensive. You could barely make out the border of present-day Afghanistan here, included are Herat, Kandahar, Kabul, and then the borders here of Pakistan, entirely within the state. And then you have this vast territory of northwest India and going into Central Asia here, and then the zones of influence. But this lasted a relatively short time, historically, only 140 years, because of three events. Internal dissension within Afghanistan, importantly, the reestablishment of Central Persian control under the Zand dynasty and their reconquest of much of the eastern provinces that had been lost to the Afghans. And the deciding factor is the Second Anglo-Afghan War of 1878-1880. That reduced the territorial size of Afghanistan to its current borders. But that's the state. The people, in particular the Pashtuns, predate Afghanistan. They have been in this region between 2,000 and 3,000 years. In 330 BC, Alexander the Great wrote about them. In 646 AD, the Chinese traveler Hiban Sang wrote about them. In 1330 AD, Muslim chronicler Ibn Battuta also wrote about them. All these men wrote about Pashtuns' fierce independence, martial valor, and unswerving loyalty to their code of honor, the Pashtun Wali. And this is my discussion. It is to be within these 1600 years, between Alexander the Great and Ibn Battuta. This land, this people will profoundly affect the course first of Hellenism, then Buddhism, and finally Islam. The world's first world empire, the largest empire at the time that the world had seen, was the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire. And this is a map of it at its greatest extent. And over here, right where you see the word Bactria, would be part of the Afghanistan, the northern part. So this whole region right here is under Persian authority. In 1334 BC, Alexander the Great invaded the Persian Empire. He conquered the empire in 6 months, but it took him 3 years to pacify Afghanistan. So here's a map of his route. He was going to create an empire, which he did, which was even greater in extent than the Persian Empire. One thing, when you look at his movements, and you see right here, here's Bactria, which would be North Afghanistan, this deployment or this route like a V. Just wanted to show you, because it affects a lot of past and present Afghanistan, the geography. The country is divided northeast, southwest by the Hindu Kush Mountains. As you can see, they form like a Messi Central. So it forces any troops to go around in that particular way that Alexander did. Now, when he successfully pacified the region, one of the things he wanted to do is have this empire of his based on one civilization, Hellenistic civilization. It was to be Greek in language, Greek in thought. It would be based on Greek philosophy, Greek arts, Greek sciences. And to advance that, he founded 20 cities across his empire. Most of them, here's the Tigris River in present-day Iraq, most are to the east of the Tigris River. And most were called Alexandrias. They had a suffix to designate what specific region they were in. But the point of all these were to be beacons of Hellenism. They would form almost a lattice work over the entire empire. Their influence would reach into the countryside, and one city's influence would overlap another city's influence, reinforcing Hellenism. The countryside would have to go at some point to the city for trade, for administrative purposes. And these were to be the signposts, the beacons, as I said, disseminating Hellenism. Now, he created 20 cities. 6 of them are in Afghanistan. So here's just the list. Alexandria, Arachosia. Now again, the suffix would be describing their location. So Alexandria, Arachosia is present-day Kandahar. And Kandahar is just the Pushtun word for Alexander. It is the one city whose name essentially never changed. Then you have Herat, which was Alexandria Ariana. The Bagram base, Alexandria in the Caucasus. Now, those mountains are the Hindu Kush, but they were also known in ancient times as the Caucasus, even though it was a repeat, 1,000 or 1,500 miles east of the Caucasus that antiquity knows near the Black Sea in Turkey. Iconium is an abandoned site. It's close to the city of Kunduz, and that is the Alexandria on the Oxus River. Ghazni is Alexandria Opiana, and Farah is Alexandria Prophasia. And these were to be the cities that were important in spreading Hellenistic civilization. And going back to that topographical map now with the cities imposed, here is Herat, here is Farah. So, as I said, Herat is Alexandria Ariana, and it just means this area was called Ariana. Farah is Alexandria Prophasia, which is Alexandria, the expected one or in anticipation. Kandahar, Alexandria Arachosia. Arachosia was the name of this region. Then Ghazni, which is Alexandria in Opiana, again defining the region. We have this area here, Shartakar, which is close to Bagdram, which is where Alexandria and the Caucasus Mountains are. And then back up here towards Kunduz is, which would be around here, is the abandoned site of Alexandria on the Oxus River by Khanum. Now the cities were laid out according to traditional Greek plans, and the way we are sure of that is that site, Alexandria on the Oxus, Iconium, around 145, 150 BC, it was attacked and destroyed by nomadic invaders, and it was abandoned. And so when it was eventually rediscovered, archaeology had an easier time of investigating how the city was laid out. So as I said, these cities would have the traditional Greek plan. Defensive walls surrounded the city. Inside, In the city center was the traditional agora, an open space which was the social and financial hub. It was also the focus for arts and athletics. Now, the buildings that were erected were all with the Greek architectural design, the columns, the capitals. The city would house temples, palaces, gymnasiums, theaters. They would have colonnade courtyards. And they would also continue the policy of Alexander the Great, and that is they would use minted coins, which first bore his image. And these were a form of wedding commerce to art and promoting, through the use of the coin and the representations on it, Hellenistic civilization. Now, when Alexander died, his empire was divided among his generals, and General Seleucus received the lion's share. As you can see, what is in green is his empire, and included much of present-day Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and parts of Tajikistan. His dynasty was called the Seleucid. It lasted 312 BC to 63 BC. What they did is they were dedicated to promoting Hellenism, and they were able to successfly expand the influence of Hellenism by settling Greek colonists from the Aegean, from the Aegean Islands, from the Greek homeland, from this area of Turkey, which was Ionia at the time, and settle them in those cities in Afghanistan and also in Pakistan that Alexander had founded. And these were to serve two purposes. They were to provide a demographic barrier to nomadic invasions, as well as advancing Hellenism throughout that land. Now, eventually, quite shortly, really, within about less than 75 years, this vast eastern region broke away from the Seleucid Empire. So the region had a multitude of names: Aria, Arachosia, Bactria, Fergana, Warasm, Sogdiana. Together, this historic region constituted an independent state called the Kingdom of Greco-Bactria. And again, they continued the use of the coins. Now, this is a depiction of Diodotus, who is considered the founder of the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom. He just replaced his image with what previously had been the image of the Seleucid king, and before that, Alexander the Great. And this is the extent of this kingdom. It was quite vast, and it was quite rich because it occupied the key grounds of the Silk Road, east to west, and then the trunk into India. Of all the successor states to Alexander the Great's empire, it's Greco-Bactria and its subsequent creation, Greco-India. First let me point one thing out. The capital of Greco-Bactria is right here, Bactria, the city of Bactria. If we go to modern Afghanistan, this is where it's located. It is the current city of Balkh. Now, from Greco-Bactria, there was further expansion east and south into India, further expanding the Hellenistic civilization. And both Greco-Bactrian Kingdom and the Greco-Indian Kingdom achieved the highest levels of Hellenism. They were equal in their grandeur to anything in the Greek homeland, to Athens or Corinth or Thebes. And again, you've seen the coin. Apollodotus I is considered the first king in the Indo-Greek kingdom, in that his base was in India. It was a separate kingdom now from Greco-Bactria. Now, At this time, the Hellenistic world was divided in half. The Persians restored their independence and restored their countries' political independence as the Parthians. And they drove the Greek Seleucid west into Syria. So the Hellenistic world was divided into two. The west was around the Mediterranean coast, the Greek homeland, Syria, and then Egypt. Then there was the growing power of the new Persian Empire, and then to the east of that was this vast, wealthy outpost of Hellenistic civilization, Greco-Bactria and Greco-India. Now, the Romans conquered the Greek homeland in 146 BC, and the Seleucids, as I said, now confined to Syria, fell to the Romans in 65 BC, and finally, Ptolemaic Egypt fell to Rome in 31 BC. But Greco-Bactria, and particularly its offshoot, Greco-India, survived much longer. Greco-Bactria fell to nomadic invaders in 125 BC, but its offspring, Greco-India, lasted until 10 AD. And the Kushans, who eventually conquered Greco-India as they did Greco-Bactria, preserved much of the Hellenistic civilization, but it was only partly Hellenized. Here is the Indo-Greek kingdom. You can see here's Greco-Bactria, the extent into central India of the Indo-Greek kingdom, and then the Kushan Empire, when it absorbed both. It kept much of the outward show of Hellenistic civilization, the upkeep of the cities, the style of the art, the coins, the dress, but they did not adopt the language Greek. So they had no insight into Greek philosophy, into Greek drama, comedy, science. So it was quite hollow, but still it survived for nearly 4 centuries. So altogether, this Greco-Bactrian, Greco-Indian kingdom, which, if we just go back, I just want to point one thing out. Greco-Bactrian into Greco-India. We're talking about the size of civilization for over 250 years. And then under the Kushans, a partly Hellenized civilization remaining for another 400. Now, while the Greek civilization still existed before the Kushans, they were to convert to Buddhism. You have the Greek and Indian, the Hellen and the Hindu, the Greco-Bactrian, the Greco-Indian kingdoms living cheek by jowl with India. Trade in commodities and ideas flourished, including Buddhism, which originated in India around the century BC. When Buddhist monks or merchants wished to proselytize or travel to China, they had to follow the Silk Road, trunk line up into India, from India into Afghanistan today, and then going east into China. They had that line, that control was under the Greeks. So there was this symbiotic relation developing through trade, and the Greco-Bactrians eventually adopted the religion of the Buddhist monks and travelers that they met and with whom they spoke. When a people convert to a new religion, conversion is easier if they find something familiar of the old religion in the new one. For the Greco-Bactrians, the teaching of Buddha on the physical and metaphysical nature of reality corresponded to the teachings of famous Greek philosophers, Democritus, Pythagoras, to schools like the Stoics, the Sophists, the Gnostics. Basically, it was this: the concept that the world is 3-dimensional, but human limitations can only see 2 dimensions, and therefore there's a reality beyond the reality. The Greeks expressed it one way, Buddhist thought expressed it another. And the constant interchange eventually led the Greeks to adopt Buddhism, but they adapted Buddhism to Hellenistic traditions, and it is this Hellenized Buddhism which will eventually move into China, into Korea, and into Japan. So, one of the first things that the Greeks did was to give a human form to the Buddha. In India, the Buddha mostly was displayed by symbols. One of the most typical was the Wheel of Life, the Dharma Chakra, which is on this slide. And it has 8 spokes, and these represent the Noble Eightfold Paths. And as the slide says, these paths include right beliefs, right aspirations, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right meditational attainment. Since they had depicted their gods and goddesses of Olympus in human form, that is what they did with Buddhism. And the first thing was, while they had the chakra wheel for Buddha, they also created a lifelike statue of Buddha. This statue, which we see here around the 2nd century AD, our time, in eastern Afghanistan, it's not what one might typically think of a Buddha. But just observe its features and its style. This shows a man, average height, medium build, full head of hair, wearing fine vestments. While he's representing the Buddha, he is also typical of any Greco-Bactrian man at that time. The hairstyle and the robes are distinctly of Greek origin and design. And this is going to be introduced into China and into Korea and into Japan. So 1,000 years later, in Kamakura, Japan, we have the famous Buddha. And again, the Greco influence. Hairstyle, earrings, the robes are there. Now, in addition to giving a human form to the Buddha and a stylized Greek form, the Greeks, also in their Hellenizing of Buddha, introduced Greek gods, goddesses, figures, and those figures within Buddhism literature, they presented in traditional Greek format. So here is the transmission from west to east, from the Afghan region into China, of Buddhism, and you see the continuation of the similarity, hairstyle, the earrings, and the vestments. Statues of Buddhist figures such as Ansika on the left and Harita on the right are in what you would really find traditional Olympian god sculptures, or sculptures of Alexander the Great, the gown of the woman, the hairstyle of the man, the tunic of the man, the breastplate. So even with Buddhist figures, they Hellenized them. And as I said, they also introduced Greek gods and heroes. And here is the introduction of Atlas. They introduced into the architecture and Buddhist monuments and temples Atlas, Boreas the wind god, Triton, son of the sea god Poseidon, Tyche, goddess of destiny, and as we'll see momentarily, variations of centaurs and cherubs. But here is Atlas, and here is a wonderful example of cultural transmission of Boreas, the wind god. Now on the left is in Greco-Bactria. It's as if it was taken from the Greek islands. It's Boreas, stylized. He has the crown. He has hold of the sails, which are billowing because he has captured the wind. Now you go into China, Western China, the closest part to Afghanistan, Greco-Bactrian, and you see the similarity with their wind god. Again, you have headgear, some type of crown, and you have the sail controlling the wind, or being filled by the wind. Again, finally, you go to the 17th century, and you have a stylized, indigenized, but still highly representative of the Greeks in the Fujin, Japanese wind god. Again, the way the figure is, especially the headgear and the billowing sail that has caught the wind. One of the most important figures is Vajrapani. Now, Vajrapani is the protector of the Buddha. For the Greeks, this person evoked their images and their memories of Heracles, Roman name Hercules. Heracles, in the Greek religion of Olympus, was the protector of Hera, queen of the gods and goddesses of Olympus. Therefore, when the Greco-Bactrians wanted to portray Vajrapani in human form, they simply crafted a traditional sculpture of Heracles with lion, skin, and club, and called the figure Vajrapani. Again, here is cultural diffusion. First, this picture on the left, sculpture rather, of Hercules, which is at the Louvre Museum. The next one over is Heracles on a coin of Greco-Bactria. Again, you can see there's the beard, there's the club, and the lion skin. Now here's where it's quite dramatic. Here we have the sitting Buddha, again with the hairstyle, the earrings, and the dress associated with Greco-Bactria, and his protector next to him, and the protector is exactly their previous rendition of the figure Hercules. Now, by the time it goes to Japan, and you have Shukan Goshin, the protector deity of Buddhist temples in Japan, it is a continuation. Again, it's localized, it's indigenized to the tastes and concerns of the Japanese, but it continues with the bare chest, the club rather, and the loose garments. Not necessarily a lion skin, but one can see the transmission. Now, they also introduced, as I said, centers and other figures. This is one which is quite remarkable. In my opinion, it's a sea god with the upper body of a man, the lower front of a horse, the tail of a fish, and also had lobster claw horns. But that was included on some Buddhist monuments and temples. Here is on the right a cave depicting a statue of the Buddha. Again, traditional Greco-Bactria style. It has been damaged. The head is missing, but above it, you can see on the left are the cherubs that have been introduced because of their association with the Greeks, and the Greeks now incorporating this with Buddhism. Now, eventually, as I said, the Persian Empire reestablished itself, and eventually even the Kushan Empire that was preserving a partly Hellenized civilization would fall. Here you have the rise of Islam, where with this boundary of the Persian Empire and this influence in the lighter purple colors, and this is the scope of the Muslim Empire. The final stage is around 800, is when you get the eastern regions, especially of Afghanistan, occupied. And it follows, again, because of the geography, what happened with Alexander. It was relatively easy in 2 or 3 years at most for the Arab Muslim armies to conquer the Persian Empire. But it took them another 2 centuries to fully pacify the the hinterland of what we call Afghanistan. It wasn't until around 1000 AD that the population in Afghanistan converted from Buddhism to Islam. And here's where the impact of Afghanistan comes on Islam. Again, going back to what I said about the conversion from Greek religion to Buddhism, if the people find something familiar of their old religion and new, it makes conversion easier. Now here, the goal of Buddhism had been nirvana, which is the complete annihilation of self and union with the cosmos, undifferentiated. You're just part of the cosmos. There's no personality. Now, one of the sects, if I can say that, of Islam at the time that it arrived in Afghanistan was Sufism, a mystical group. And this attracted Buddhism to Islam because of its similarity to nirvana. The goal of Sufism is fana, the complete annihilation of self and union with God. And Sufism became established in Afghanistan, and it was embraced, and it became a power both to spread Islam further. It is Afghan Sufism that was responsible for facilitating the spread of Islam into India. But there was also a backward flow, if you were, a reverse flow of Sufism from Afghanistan into the rest of the Islamic world. The first and one of the most important impacts was its influence on Persian language. Sufi ideas were frequently expressed through the medium of poetry. Now, the language used in that region of the Muslim Empire remained the language of the old Persian Empire, Persian. But the Persian was lingua franca, reduced simply to purposes of administration and commerce. The Sufis, with their poetry, they used the Persian language, they revitalized the Persian language, and they elevated the Persian language to not just a literary language once again, but to the source of what is considered some of the world's greatest mystical poetries. Now, it also, Sufism went further west and took root in the Arab world. Baghdad, the capital of the Muslim Empire, the Abbasid Empire at the time, became a secondary source, an important source of Sufi teaching and learning. When the Ottoman Empire gained hegemony over the Middle East in the 16th century, Sufism became an integral part of Turkish culture and society. And in Ottoman times, Sufism was as important to the spread of the Ottomans into sub-Saharan Africa and the Balkans and the Caucasus as it had been earlier with the spread of Islam into India. Now, Sufism transcends the Sunni-Shia schism. There are Sunni Sufis as well as Shia Sufis. So here is just a table. As you know, the original split between Sunni and Sufi was just over who should be the political leader after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. There was no original theological differences. Both accentuated or stated the importance of good living through the Quran, following God's word, and by doing that, being able to, at the day of judgment, be welcomed into heaven. But there are people that would like a more intimate association with God, and this is what Sufism offered. And the Sufism is based on, first you live a good life as a Muslim, you follow all the directions of the Quran, obey the laws of the Sharia. And then, if you wish to pursue Sufism, you will join a religious order, and that religious order will have certain traditions that you will follow, including certain prayers. And you will eventually, in stages, be able to, as I say, see the true reality, that the world is three-dimensional, but human physical limitations only see it in two. Through Sufism, you will get a glimpse of knowledge through God's blessing. And this appeals to many, and the religious order, as I said, also became a military order. So this is just one TRADOC Sufi order, famous in Afghanistan, Central Asia region, the Naqshbandi, and all the purple is its influence between 1500 and 1900. But I want to show it to you because it gives a clear indication that after supporting or being an important aspect of Ottoman expansion into Africa, the Caucasus, the Balkans, later, by the 19th and the 20th century, the Sufi orders were also very important in first resistance to European encroachment in the Muslim world, and then active resistance to their political control of the area. Now, all of this found impact on the development and diffusion of Hellenistic, Buddhist, and Islamic civilizations. Their influence, in turn, on the evolution of Chinese, Korean, and Japanese, later Persian, Arabic, and Turkish cultures, all derived from Afghanistan. So here we see in the map, the green is Islam, the red is Hinduism, the light beige is Buddhism, the darker shade is listed as traditional Chinese religions. But Buddhism as a religion and the culture of China, as well as Korea and Japan, all of this area, green, red, and the beige, with the exception of Southeast Asia, was influenced. And it's remarkable. Its impact is truly inspiring. Therefore, when you read or hear of the ongoing tragedy of Afghanistan, it is important to remember that this land, for more than a millennia and a half, this land and this people achieved intellectual glory, cultural grandeur, and the elevation of the human spirit. And my one hope is that this lost history, and not the events of recent times, can be the foundations upon which the future of Afghanistan is built. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful 4th of July, and if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, sir. And while our guests are entering their questions in the chat box at the bottom of their screen, I have a couple of my own that I'd like to throw out. Admittedly, not an expert in this area, but things that kind of pop into my head as you were going through your presentation. Given this long history and a wildly diverse of cultures and different occupiers and empires that have, and the ebb and flow across the region, what do you see as the points where common ground might be found today from actors with distinctly different cultural perspectives?
I'm not quite sure. Do you mean how rivalries of European powers or Russia or China and the US play out in Afghanistan? Or
more building on the common heritage that we've all gone through, whether it's the Hellenistic or whether it's Buddhist, whichever the common actors that are working in there and trying to influence the area right now. How far back do we have to reach to find some sort of common ground?
I think the common ground could be found within Islam itself and Buddhism. One of the things that happened after the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas by the Taliban years back, I was at a lecture at Columbia University, and this lecturer from India, I believe he was, no, forgive me, he was Pakistan. He said, Up until now, we had only alienated Judaism and Christianity. Now with the Taliban, they've managed to alienate one of the largest religions in the world, Buddhism. And they did. But I think that there is that thread that goes through all three, and really, in a way, exists in our civilization today, if we talk about Western civilization. And that is the way of viewing life and reality, whether it's the Gnostics or whether it's Buddhists or whether it's the Sufis. The idea that there's more to life than just what you see here, that there's a reality beyond the reality. That is a clear basis for the scientific revolution. It can be a basis for bridging both science and theology and having this one common thread from all three religions, the unifier, something that is relevant. Now, Hellenism itself doesn't exist today anymore. Western civilization is an offshoot, but there's fundamental differences in it. So you're really dealing with Western civilization, Buddhism, and Islam, and I think there is that thread that I said of seeking the reality beyond the reality that is such a basis of science that it can be a meeting part for the disparate elements, whether there's religious leaders or whether there are political leaders.
And that's an ongoing work. One of the questions that is popping up here is from Dr. Jevdet Reksavi, one of our own regional functional scholars. And he makes some interesting points there. I'm not going to read through all of them. You can go ahead and read that. But he does talk about how this point emphasized by the Afghan experience and how the influx of people helps reinvigorate and replenish societies. I might take the flip side. It says that also suppresses and reduces societies. What are your thoughts on how this influx of people help do that, reinvigorate or replenish societies?
Interesting. Yes, Ibn Khaldun had mentioned that there was this cycle. I think it's also mentioned by, I'm forgetting the man's name. He recently died, a Columbia professor. Basically, the analogy that a civilization consists of these cycles where, the example is a staircase. Hobnail boots go up and silk slippers come down. And that's kind of the example, that there comes a point where the roughness is refined to an extent that it attracts outsiders that are still aggressive and can either adopt and enrich like the Kushans for 400 years, or like another nomadic tribe, I'm not sure which one, that just devastated Alexandria on the Oxus, Iconium. But it really, it's true and it's false. It depends on the circumstances. In the case of Afghanistan, it shows how that is true, with a few examples, as I said, Iconium being a case where it was just destroyed. But I think it has to be case specific. The introduction of the Greeks was paramount to ensure Hellenism in that region. And its effect on the Kushans in many ways was like the effect of the Western Roman Empire on the Germans. In the case that both envied it, both wanted to be a part of it, both adopted the trappings of it, but when they didn't adopt the language and understand through that medium what the Greeks were saying through their philosophy and their arts, their comedies and their dramas. Similarly with the Romans, with regard to their laws, you had something that was as long-lasting, quite brittle, and it would eventually fall to a more, oh, I don't want to use the word militant, but more, so shall we say, solid. When the cushions fell finally to a variety of forces, but one in the West was the renewed Persian Empire. It was a Persian Empire, and their culture was their own. I mean, whatever they had adopted, they had so integrated it was their own. While the cushions were still in that German Western Roman Empire stance, where they had the outside, but they didn't know what the inside was. They knew the trappings, but not the substance. And I think that can be a case where it becomes brittle, and it can't be preserved from a rival civilization or a rival power. So it's I think case specific.
Interesting. And here's another question. This one coming from Carl Prinsloo. And it dovetails a little bit with your discussion of the destruction of the Bahmian Buddhas. And his question is, will the common background of the current actors, meaning the Karzai government and the Taliban in Afghanistan, be able to overcome their current and conflicting interests and objectives? Do you think common background or religion are not enough?
I don't know if they're enough, because besides common interests, common background, there's the difference in politics, the difference in who has the power and how is it going to be exercised. One of the latest articles I read last week came out after the talks, or the talks about the talks between the U.S. and the Taliban, of Karzai's ambassadors, some of them preparing to seek sanctuary in whatever country they are representing Karzai, not wanting to come back because of the fear of what would happen if the Taliban come back into power, or even anyone that could not really protect them. I think a missed opportunity was, it's just my own personal opinion, bringing back the king. He was the king for 30 years, King Zahir Shah. He was overthrown by his cousin, the prime minister, and he went to exile in Rome. And the importance of the king was he was a unifying factor that I don't see there now. He was a Pushtun, but he also had excellent relations compared to everyone else from 78 on to today, excellent relations with the non-Pushtuns. His wife was the first to discard the burqa in public and expose her face and her arms, and he was able to get away from it, get away with it, because he had a working relationship with the traditional religious leaders. He was able to have schools begin the process of having education for females, for young girls, bringing women into professions. When the Taliban first appeared, one of their political platforms was they wanted the king back. And I think it was an opportunity lost, because I think right now you have the differences in politics, and they're backed up by, to some extent, the code of honor, and that is there could be blood feuds. And there's very little options besides trying to get the two parties to negotiate an understanding to end that internecine violence. I think that you have in Afghanistan 90%, over 90% of the population do not live in villages, do not live in towns or cities, they live in villages. And these villages are self-supporting. They're essentially almost like the Greek city-states to some extent. And that's where they function on the local level. And any attempt by any political authority, the communists were the first and the Taliban the second, to impose a centralized control caused an uprising of some sort. So The difficulty is to, one, find at least one person that has acceptable, satisfactory, can work in some way with both secular and religious, both with Pushtun and non-Pushtun, and can ensure that that the system in Afghanistan that has existed for millennia, local control over these areas, is maintained. So right now, I think that we might be in for a bumpy road, but it can smooth out if the central power and the central government restores its original role, basically first among equals, with the outlying areas living their own life.
Interesting. One more question. What do you see as the, and this is almost a standard one, what do you see as the most effective and the least effective actions that are happening right now in Afghanistan and the region from coalition elements, from the West in general?
From the West. I think there's this confusion first, at least the atmospherics, from what the Karzai government is saying. They're indicating they felt sidelined in these negotiations, and they are indicating some type of not just displeasure but concern for their safety. So I think how the talks first met the public media might not have been the best way if what the Karzai government is saying is accurate and the Karzais were not informed of this. But then you go to what one British official said last week, and he said these talks should have been begun 10 years ago. There is an expert, he's an anthropologist, sociologist, expert in the field of Islamic extremism through field research, Dr. Scott Atran, and he suggested have elections, allow the Taliban to run. He said because there are a lot of people claiming to be Taliban that have no allegiance to Mullah Omar. It's just a name they use. And there will, even if, quote, Taliban with the largest number of seats, it wouldn't be a coherent bloc. Doesn't necessarily mean there would be instability. It would just be an opportunity for the population to see the strength of the Taliban. So I think one is, how did they go about the talks? And when the time limit, it's been 10 years, it would have been better to try it before then. And the second is the ongoing question of the drones. Are they causing problems? If you end up having civilians killed, I really don't like to use the word innocent civilians. Civilians, to me, by their very nature in a war, are innocent. There needs to be no adjective. When civilians are killed, you're going to have the blood feud. You're going to require some type of settlement, which is going to make matters more difficult to settle when one tribe, when you're a member of a tribe, the honor of the tribe rests with you individually, and you have a responsibility to uphold the honor. And when you have people who are attacked, civilians who are killed, then the tribal code of conduct would say whoever did that either has to provide blood money, an apology, or one of them, not necessarily the drone pilots, someone of who their group is, has to be punished, has to be attacked. So I think the drones have the potential of inflaming the issue. So those are the two things: the timing of when to talk to the Taliban. Maybe it should have been done earlier. And two, the drones have whatever positive of taking out of killing off a guerrilla leader. because of the tribal code of conduct, killing civilians is going to have a long-term, potentially long-term, destabilizing effect for the country overall. And again, I think the first mistake the West had in Afghanistan was not calling the Taliban's bluff and saying, fine, we're reinstalling the king, just like you said. In a country, in any tribal society where you have a code of honor, and here you have not just the code of honor of the Pushtunwali, but you have their religious honor, and the Taliban say, we want the king, you just say, yeah. For them to go back and say, nah, we don't want that, makes them dishonorable. They would lose many supporters. I just wish that option was played out. I think that is the first fundamental flaw that the West did in Afghanistan, because the king had run the country for 30, 35 years, and he was better than anything that succeeded him, and the Taliban said they wanted him back. It seemed to be an ideal opportunity of solving the issue right then and there.
Well, and on that, I think we'll go ahead and close out, because I think that was a really great thought. Did you have any other big thoughts that you'd like to leave us with before we shut down today?
Just that sometimes the world looks at the current status of a country and a people, and you'll hear names or titles or phrases thrown out, failed states. And sometimes if you look deeper, you'll find that regardless of what the political situation is at the present, that people, that land, had a very rich culture. Afghanistan, I think, is an outstanding example of that phenomenon, of disproportionate impact of rich culture, and unfortunately the current time doesn't show that. But it's not just limited to Afghanistan. I think you will find that elsewhere in the world. And I would hope people to be open to the possibility that what you see presently is not an indication of past achievements.